Maya Gavanen Melanin and Menek Swilaid. My name's Rainbow Dave, or David of many colours, as has been suggested, and welcome finally to another Lord of the Rings book versus movie comparison video. So it's been over a year since I started this series where I talked about book 1, which is not to say the Fellowship, that's to say book 1 as Tolkien intended it. The bit that ends with Frodo defying the Nazgul at the fords of Bruinen and his pursuers being washed away by the flood of Elrond and Gandalf, that is book 1. And so in this series I'll cover book 2 of the 6 that Tolkien envisioned, and this roughly corresponds to the second half of the Fellowship movie. And it begins with Frodo's awakening in the House of Elrond and his reunion with Gandalf. And this scene's movie counterpart is really quite faithful. In the books, Frodo has been asleep for 4 nights and 3 days, and in that time, Elrond has healed the poison of the Morgul wound as best as he can, potentially, although not explicitly, with the aid of his elven ring, Vilya. Anyway, Frodo and Gandalf chat, as they do in the movie, and eventually they are joined by Sam, and then by Merry and Pippin. And this chapter in the book is called Many Meetings, which is a very appropriate name, as Frodo meets many important people, some of whom do make it into the movie, and some of whom don't. Now, I feel like the main point of this chapter, the main person that Frodo meets, is of course Bilbo, after 17 years apart. And this reintroduction, this reunion, is kind of what the chapter's all about, and the movie does a really good job with it, but Frodo does also spend a fair bit of time with another character in this chapter, who only cameos for a second in the movie, but he is actually a pretty important figure in Middle-earth, and one we're all very familiar with from The Hobbit. And that person is Gloin, the father of Gimli. So, we are told that there are 2 reasons why Gloin came with his son Gimli to Rivendell, and the first one is that he was sent on behalf of his king, the king of Erebor, Dain Ironfoot. And he came to ask Elrond if he has any information on what happened to Balin. That's another dwarf from The Hobbit, who left Erebor almost 30 years ago to try and establish a new dwarven colony in Moria, which of course we'll get to later. But the other reason that Gloin came to Rivendell directly ties to Bilbo. So, about a year earlier in the story, a messenger from Mordor came all the way to Erebor, and he came supposedly seeking friendship with King Dain Ironfoot. Now, this messenger could have been the mouth of Sauron, or it could have been a Nazgul, we don't know. But what we do know is that he came on behalf of Sauron himself, and he was looking for Baggins. Now, Dain is of course vaguely familiar with a hobbit called Baggins, but Gloin, he knows exactly who this messenger is referring to. He and Bilbo went on an epic quest together 76 years ago. And so, a big part of the reason that Gloin is in Rivendell when Frodo gets there is because he's come all the way to warn his buddy, to say to Bilbo, "My dude, bad people are looking for you, watch your back," which I think is really lovely. It reminds us that although The Hobbit happened a long time ago, the friendships of that story are still going very strong by the time of The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, there are a few other people that Frodo meets in Rivendell before the Council of Elrond. There's an elf called Lindir, who we literally never meet again, except for some reason in the Hobbit movies. And there's also Arwen, of whom we're told few mortals had yet seen. And, of course, there is Elrond himself. And, now that I mention Elrond, there is something I need to get off my chest. Because, honestly, in my opinion, Elrond is the most miscast character in all of the Lord of the Rings movies. I mean, Frodo is also a bit terribly miscast, but I've already talked about him in previous videos, so right now I'll focus on Elrond. And just like with Frodo, I do not blame this on the actor's acting ability. Hugo Weaving is a fine actor, so is Elijah Wood, but they are both absolutely wrong for the roles that they are playing. And in the case of Elrond, I actually think a huge part of this is the writing. So let me explain what I mean here. So Elrond in the movies, he is very wise, but he's also very stern and very cold, and all round he's just a bit of a jerk. He's incredibly rude about dwarves, and he seems to have a real chip on his shoulder in regards to men, especially Aragorn, which makes no sense. And I think this casting choice is made even weirder by the fact that in the early 2000s, when this movie was coming out, Hugo Weaving was best known for his role in that other huge movie trilogy, The Matrix. Why would you cast Agent Smith as Elrond? Why would you cast one of the most iconic villains of that generation as a character that Tolkien described as noble and fair as an elf lord and as kind as summer? At what point in the movies is Hugo Weaving's Elrond as kind as summer? And I know in the films they do give us a little flashback to Elrond and Isildur at the Cracks of Doom, which doesn't happen in the books, and from that I guess we're supposed to sympathise with Elrond because, you know, he was there when the strength of men failed. But there is so much wrong with this. Firstly, Elrond talks about men like he's not one of them, like he's completely above them. But the only reason Elrond is an elf and not a man is because he chose to be an elf. His twin brother chose to be a man. His twin brother was the first king of Númenor. He was a direct ancestor of Isildur himself and thus also of Aragorn. Elrond's father was one of the only 50-50 half-elf, half-man characters in the entire Legendarium. His grandfather, Tuor, was a mortal man of great renown, and his great-grandfather on the other side of the family tree is Beren. As in, like, Beren and Luthien. So the idea that Elrond has some sort of ill will towards the entire race of men is absurd. He literally embodies the union of elves and men. And I guess another reason that they made Elrond such a dick in the movies was to create more conflict in the whole Aragorn-Arwen love story. And I suppose that kind of makes sense, like conflict is the engine of storytelling after all. But this conflict is not true to what Tolkien intended. We're explicitly told by Tolkien that Elrond loved Aragorn like a son. He raised him as a child, and although he was, sad about the thought of losing Arwen to a mortal life, he does not blame Aragorn for loving her, and he doesn't try to stop them from being together. For the most part, I absolutely love Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings, but in this one instance, I really do feel that movie Elrond is just like a badly written character. Like, why would this version of Elrond even still be in Middle-earth? He's clearly lost hope that Sauron can be defeated. He outright states that he has no faith in men or dwarves, so why hasn't he sailed west already? Hugo Weaving is a fantastic actor, and if they made The Lord of the Rings now, I think he would be ideal casting for someone like Denethor, who is stern and who is haughty, but is also very wise and dignified. I think Hugo Weaving would be great in that role, but he's not as kind as Summer. Anyway, that was a huge tangent. Apologies if movie Elrond is your favourite character, but I promise you he is better in the books. However, getting back on topic, the next scene in the movie is the famous Council of Elrond, which I think Peter Jackson did a pretty good job at adapting, especially as in the book this chapter is crazy long, and they talk about so much stuff that is shown elsewhere in the movie, such as the story of the Last Alliance in the prologue and all the stuff with Saruman and Gandalf that I've talked about in previous videos. But there are also quite a few really cool details that come up in this council that are not present in the movies. So I will begin with who exactly is at this council. You see, in the books there are 13 named characters present. That's including Sam, who is hiding in a corner, although interestingly not Merry or Pippin. Anyway, the other 12 members are Elrond, obviously, Frodo, Bilbo, Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gloin, Boromir, Glorfindel, and then there are two other elves who we never see again. Their names are Erestor, he is a chief counsellor of Elrond's, and a guy called Galdor of the Havens, who is actually a messenger sent on behalf of my favourite behind-the-scenes character, Círdan the Shipwright. And one of the main things that they talk about that's not included in the movies is the story of how Gollum escaped the captivity of the Wood Elves in Mirkwood. So I talked in an earlier video about how Aragorn spent years hunting Gollum, and after he finally captured him in the Dead Marshes, Aragorn brought him all the way to Mirkwood, where Gandalf interrogated him about the ring. Then Gollum was placed in the care, or I guess captivity, of Thranduil Sylvan elves, and there he remained for a few months. However, about 3 months before Frodo left Bag End, the Woodland Realm was attacked by orcs in what seems almost certainly a coordinated attack, organised by Sauron to ensure Gollum's escape from Mirkwood. I guess Sauron hoped that Gollum would be instrumental in uncovering the location of his ring, which, to be fair to Sauron, Gollum totally did eventually do, just not quite in the way that Sauron hoped. Anyway, this story is relayed to the council by Thranduil's son, Legolas. And this is actually the whole reason that Legolas was in Rivendell at the time of the forming of the Fellowship. And I think Tolkien makes a really interesting point here that the movies actually totally contradict, because despite what's implied, and then also straight up stated in an extended scene of the Two Towers, Elrond in the books did not summon these people to his council. No one was invited, and the Council of Elrond isn't really some well-organised meeting that was announced months in advance. Instead, it is simply a chance gathering of the right people who just happen to have converged in the right place at the right time. And this theme of chance is really, really central to Tolkien's Legendarium. Because although I know the word I'm using here is chance, chance isn't really what we're talking about. This isn't random luck. This is the hand of a higher power. It's the will of Eru Ilúvatar. It's his plan with a capital P. And I know it's fun to speculate on how things could have gone differently in The Lord of the Rings, or to say what characters should have done instead of what they did. But honestly, I think one of the major themes of Tolkien's story is that there is no other way things could have gone. If Sauron's orcs didn't free Gollum from Mirkwood, then he would never have shown up at the Cracks of Doom and the ring would never have been destroyed. If Faramir had joined the Fellowship instead of Boromir, he probably wouldn't have tried to take the ring from Frodo, Frodo wouldn't have gone off on his own, and the ring would never have been destroyed. If Merry and Pippin hadn't been captured by Uruk-hai, they would never have met the Ents, so Isengard probably wouldn't have fallen when it did, which means Rohan could not have come to the defense of Minas Tirith, which means the host of the West would not have marched on the Black Gate, which means the Orcs of Mordor would not have been diverted to fight them, Frodo and Sam would never have made it to Mount Doom, and the ring would never have been destroyed. There is a certain way that things have to happen in Middle-earth, and thanks to Eru Ilúvatar, that's the way they do happen. So I think the Council of Elrond in the books is a much more special event than it is in the movies, because they aren't summoned to answer the threat of Mordor. They're agents in a much larger plan, and it's a plan that none of them are really aware of, even Gandalf. And I guess perhaps the best example, alright, of what I'm talking about here is the arrival of Boromir. So I've already said that Gimli and Gloin were in Rivendell for a fair while before the council, and presumably so was Legolas, but Boromir, he didn't make it to Rivendell until the night before this council. He spent 110 days on the road, but he didn't arrive until the night before he absolutely had to. And the reason that Boromir even went on this mad journey all on his own and without a horse for a good while is actually alluded to in the movies, but it's not fully explained. You see, literally, the day before Sauron's orcs attacked Mirkwood and Gollum escaped, on the complete other side of Middle-earth, both Boromir and Faramir received a cryptic dream. In fact, Faramir received the dream a few times, and in this dream, both brothers heard a riddle. Seek for the sword that was broken, in Imladris it dwells. There shall be counsels taken, stronger than Morgul's spells. There shall be shown a token, that doom is near at hand, for Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand. Now, of course, the three most important parts of this prophecy are the sword that was broken, which obviously pertains to Aragorn, Isildur's bane, which we obviously know is the One Ring, but neither Boromir nor Faramir nor anyone else in Gondor did. After all, Isildur was killed by orc arrows. And the third important thing is the halfling, Frodo. And so, Boromir doesn't come to Rivendell seeking, military aid or to claim the ring or anything like that. What he wants is advice from the wise. In fact, the whole Council of Elrond is a lot more chilled in the book than it is in the film, and there's no indication that the ring is kind of fueling any sort of conflict, although, to be honest, I do really like this addition in the movie. But in the book, there are three possible solutions proposed at this council for what is to be done with the ring. Firstly, that Erestor dude, he suggests that why not give the One Ring to the only person in Middle-earth who's demonstrated any immunity to its corruption, Tom Bombadil, or Iarwain Benedar as he is called by the Sindarin-speaking elves. And this may seem like a good idea, Tom Bombadil can keep the ring secret and protected and far out of reach of Sauron, but as Glorfindel and Gandalf and Galdor all make abundantly clear, this is in fact a terrible idea. Tom Bombadil is not a warrior. He cannot defend the ring from the encroaching darkness, and even if he did agree to take care of it, he wouldn't appreciate the ring's importance. He wouldn't understand the need to protect it. As Gandalf says, Tom would soon forget it, or most likely throw it away. So option 1 is a non-starter. But option 2 is suggested by Glorfindel, and this option is a little bit more sensible. But just like option 1, it's less of a solution and more just postponing the inevitable. Glorfindel suggests that they could just send the One Ring into the uttermost west and just let the Valar deal with it. And to be fair, if there is anyone who could destroy the ring, it's probably the Valar Aule, the guy who taught Sauron how to craft in the first place. But Elrond explains that this also won't work. He says that they who dwell beyond the sea would not receive it. For good or ill, it belongs to Middle-earth. So, Glorfindel suggests instead throwing the ring into the deepest part of the ocean and just letting it become lost forever. And this is a decent idea. I mean, the ring was lost in the Anduin River for 2,461 years, so it stands to reason that it could be lost in the sea for a lot longer. But it won't destroy Sauron. In fact, casting the ring into the water is not only what Sauron expects them to do, it's kind of what he wants them to do. Sauron has time on his side, and as long as the ring endures, he can't really lose. Not in the long term. And so we come to option 3, which we all know is casting the ring into the fire and destroying it. And when this idea is suggested, a plucky old hobbit jumps up and he pretty immediately volunteers to be the one to carry it. But this hobbit is not Frodo. It's actually Bilbo who suggests walking to Mordor. He basically says, guys, I hear what you're saying. I'm the silly old hobbit who started this. I should be the one to finish it. It's a nuisance, but when do we start? Which I think we can all agree is very, very sweet, but A, Bilbo's 128 years old at this point, and B, I don't think anyone's particularly comfortable with giving the ring back to Bilbo after 17 years of him being free from it. And so, after a very long silence, Frodo volunteers. But the wording that Tolkien uses here I find very interesting. He writes that the words came as if some other will was using his small voice, which I believe is another subtle reference to that greater, higher power. Frodo is the only person in all of Middle-earth who can get the ring to the cracks of doom, and Eru Ilúvatar knows it. Anyway, just like in the movie, Sam jumps out at this point, and he immediately volunteers to go with his master. But that is where the council ends. So what we've established in the Council of Elrond is that Frodo will take the ring to Mordor, and that Sam is not going to let him go alone. But in the book, it takes a whole 53 more days for the Fellowship of the Ring to be officially formed. So, in the weeks that follow, it's decided that the number shall be 9, and that Gandalf should be among them. Actually, that happened more or less at the council, but it takes almost 2 months for the other 6 members to be finalised. And one of the main reasons that Frodo waits so long in Rivendell is because Elrond does not want him to set off until the 9 Nazgul have all been accounted for. We know that they were washed away in the flood, but at this point in the story, no one really knows what happened to them after that, or where they even are now. So, a good number of scouts are sent out from Rivendell, and among them are a few familiar names. With Aragorn's help, the Rangers of the North travel as far southwest as the ancient and abandoned Númenórean city of Tharbad, and they go as far east as Mirkwood and even to Radagast the Brown's home of Rosgobel, although we're actually told the wizard wasn't in. And we also get a hint at something very cool going on with Elrond's sons here, but you kinda need to have already read the story to pick up on it. So, Tolkien tells us that while Frodo and his friends were chilling in Rivendell, the twins Elladan and Elrohir made a great journey, passing down the Silverlode into a strange country. But of their errand, they would not speak to any save Elrond. Now, I feel that I can say with a fair degree of certainty that the great journey of Elladan and Elrohir, the strange country that they visited and spoke to no one but Elrond about, is in fact Lothlorien, the country of their grandparents. And I think this is particularly cool because Elladan and Elrohir basically make the exact same trip from Rivendell to Lothlorien that the Fellowship makes only a few months later. Although, to be fair, they probably did go over the Misty Mountains instead of under them via Moria. Anyway, the point of these scouting missions is to tell us that 8 of the 9 Nazgul are accounted for, and so Frodo must delay no longer. And so, on the 18th of December, only a week before the ring leaves Rivendell forever, the Fellowship is finally officially formed. As we all know, Legolas and Gimli both volunteer to represent elves and dwarves respectively, but until this moment, Frodo actually has no reason to believe that Aragorn will join them. You see, during the council, Aragorn declared his intention to journey not with Frodo, but with Boromir, to Minas Tirith, and to aid Gondor in the ongoing war. However, from Rivendell, the road to Minas Tirith and the road to Mordor are the exact same road for many hundreds of miles, and so, for that reason, both Aragorn and Boromir joined the company too. But I do think it's worth pointing out that unlike in the movie, neither Aragorn nor Boromir ever originally intended to go all the way to Mordor. They always knew that they would part with Frodo eventually, and obviously this choice becomes a lot more difficult for Aragorn when Gandalf dies and he becomes like the leader of the company, but I'll talk about that over the next few videos. Anyway, this of course gives us 7 companions, which leaves only the last 2, Merry and Pippin. However, in the books, there was actually a little bit of pushback against the potentially unconventional decision to populate 50% of the Fellowship with inexperienced hobbits. Initially, Elrond suggested 2 elves of his household to fill those other 2 spots, and it was actually Glorfindel who was personally named. And although it's pretty awesome to imagine how different things could have been if Glorfindel had taken Pippin's place in the Fellowship, I do ultimately agree with Gandalf on this issue. He says that even Glorfindel could not storm the Dark Tower, and so it would be better to trust rather to their friendship than to great wisdom. And so, Merry and Pippin become members 8 and 9 of the Fellowship. Although even then, Elrond does still voice his concerns at sending Pippin, who by the standards of his own people isn't even an adult yet, into danger. But to this, Pippin says, "Then Master Elrond, you will have to lock me in a prison or send me home tied in a sack." To which Elrond sighs, understandably, and then he says, "Let it be so then." Which brings us to the last change I'm going to talk about in this video. And although I left it to the end, I actually think it's one of the most important deviations from the source material in the entire trilogy of movies. And it's not actually a scene that's cut from the films, it's just a scene that's included at a very different time in the story. What I'm talking about is, of course, the Reforging of Anduril. So, in the books, the shards of Narsil are forged anew into Anduril, the Flame of the West, and they're given to Aragorn as a symbol of his kingship right here, at the beginning of the Fellowship's quest. Whereas, obviously, in the movies, this happens way later in the Return of the King. And although this change may not seem like a huge deal, I think it totally changes Aragorn's entire character arc and even his characterization. As I said in the books, Aragorn leaves Rivendell intending to return the Sword of the King to Minas Tirith, and to help Boromir rally the armies of Gondor in the war against Sauron. But of course, then Gandalf dies and the leadership of the Fellowship falls to Aragorn, and then the Fellowship breaks and Boromir dies, Merry and Pippin get captured, and Aragorn takes his sword and he takes a detour from Minas Tirith to journey instead in pursuit of the Uruk-hai. But before he can accomplish that, he meets Éomer, he shows him his sword, and then he gets entangled in the whole Rohan thing, and he fights with Anduril alongside another king of men, Theoden, at the Battle of the Hornburg. He and Anduril accompany Theoden to Isengard, where Saruman is overthrown, and only then is Aragorn free to return to his original quest of returning to Minas Tirith with the reforged Sword of the King. But then, of course, once again, things end up happening. Pippin looks into the Palantir and he gets whisked off to Minas Tirith with Gandalf. Merry stays with the Rohirrim, but Aragorn and his sword are encountered by the sons of Elrond and the Grey Company, which aren't included in the movie, but instead, at this point, we are given a different version of Aragorn acquiring Anduril. And of course, in both versions, Aragorn then takes Anduril and he uses it in the whole Oathbreakers, Dead Men Have Done Harrow thing, and he doesn't finally arrive at Minas Tirith until the darkest moment of the Battle of Pelennor Fields, where he and Anduril turn the tide of the war. Aragorn then comes to Minas Tirith, but he doesn't set foot inside. Well, actually, he does unofficially go in cloaked and without Anduril to the Houses of Healing, and there he does sort of earn his right to call himself king, but he doesn't call himself king just yet. He leaves the city and he does not set foot inside again until after the ring is destroyed and he is crowned king at the gates. And that is the final culmination of this huge character arc that began with Aragorn in Rivendell and the reforging of Anduril. And although I do really love Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn, the Aragorn of the movies has a totally different arc, and it comes across as a totally different character. Most obviously, I guess there's his doubt and his reluctance to be king, which I guess the filmmakers thought would make him seem more humble and sympathetic. But again, from a writing perspective, I think this actually comes across as kind of selfish. I don't care if he wants to be the king. Does he think Frodo wants to be the ring bearer? He has a duty, and that duty is to unite the Dunedain and return them to the days of the king, which is so intimately tied to his love for Arwen. I actually have a whole video all about this, which you should check out after this one if you want to learn more. But basically, Aragorn knows that he can't take Arwen's hand in marriage until he is crowned king, and he achieves his destiny. So when movie Aragorn is super reluctant to be king, but still pursuing a relationship with Arwen, that doesn't really make sense, at least not from a book perspective. So, as we move forward with this Lord of the Rings book-to-movie series, remember that from this moment on in the books, Aragorn is the wielder of Anduril, and he is committing himself to Minas Tirith and to his Dunedain people. And I think the other thing to be very aware of is that the Fellowship do not have a plan. As they leave Rivendell, they have an end goal, or I guess 2 end goals, but they don't have a route planned. They don't think too far ahead, and they tackle problems as and when they arrive. And so that's what I'll talk all about in the next video, as the Fellowship leaves Rivendell and begins their journey into the wilds, which is one of my favourite parts of both the movies and the books. So if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss next week's video, and hit the like button and leave a comment if you want to. Also, if you're enjoying this channel, then please consider sharing it with friends and with family and with fellow Tolkien fans, as I think that's probably the best way to grow this Tolkien community. Anyway, as always, my dear friends, until next time, much love, stay groovy, and Nevaya Melanine.